Okay, so this is the review for the final exam. For the first question, well, actually, all of these from the book, they're pretty straightforward. If you read the book, they're pretty easy. So the first one, how Sam's financial situation affected Beth, right? I'm just asking you a question there about how, since they were still married, at the time of his death, she inherited his debts. The woman she met in prison, was her friend, and basically she let her stay at her house, and then she wouldn't leave. She used her ID and her checkbook, and just stole from her, so that wasn't great. Deborah was an important support system that she had, because she would often take care of her kids when she needed someone to do that. Okay, and the drama with the Joneses, basically, just about the conflicts that they had, how they tried to basically say that she had premeditated his murder, how they broke into her house, how they, broke the sprinklers in her yard, all those kind of things that they did, you know, to her. And then as far as Daniel testifying, she was obviously upset about her son having to testify about what he saw, because basically she was afraid that that was going to make him recall the traumatic event and re-victimize him. Let's see. Oh, the fear of being charged with murder. So, she talks about this idea that even though the case was closed and all of that is done, she still fears being charged with murder, and that's because there's no statute of limitation on murder charges, right? Which is kind of interesting when you have things like rape. There's a pretty short statute of limitations in a lot of states for those kind of offenses, so it's interesting, murder is one of the only ones that there is no, statute. Basically, as far as the physical harm, meaning what this means is that people often assume, okay, this person that's been victimizing you is gone, but a lot of women end up being either retaliated against, kind of in the way that the Joneses did, often face violence or recrimination or just harassment from the family of the abuser as well. Okay, chapter 9. So basically, that's all that the question's about. I'm going to ask you, which is the most common form of partner abuse. It's psychological. Just the fact that when it comes to definitions, there's still not a clear consensus about how to define male to female IPV. Again, that batterers are most likely to explain violence that they perpetrate by blaming their female partner for causing it. And of course, there's often, this happens to men as well, but just predominantly what is reported, it tends to be females. So, it's kind of one of those situations where I'm going to ask you which is most common. So this non-gender symmetrical thing, all I'm looking for there is that, people often try and say, well, if men are facing abuse and women are facing abuse, do we approach those things 50-50? How do we address these kind of issues where men aren't able to come forward in a lot of ways and there aren't the kind of services available for them? So not gender symmetrical just means that we have to acknowledge that even though I'm sure there's a huge proportion of this kind of invisible victim, there's still so many women that are also in that kind of frame that it tends to be that we still need to have understanding and research towards issues that affect men, but we should still be offering a lot of services for women as they do come forward as the majority of victims. Let's see. Anger. Just the relationship between anger and offending. It's, the research in your book talks about how it's pretty consistent that batterers are angrier than men who don't offend. So there's a relationship there between anger. Shame Also, there's a lot of research that suggests that, adult batterers have a lot of shame, which is often, linked to the kind of situations that they might have gone through themselves through childhood, right? So if they were abused, they maybe had some bad attachments, and as a result, when they grow up, it kind of has warped their perception of their role in relationships. When it comes to male to female IPV and attachment, same kind of deal. That's really the mitigating issue, is a feeling of not having attachment is what leads to someone to feel the need to try and control someone. They're often, like we talked about this idea that jealousy is love, but really it's all about control or feeling, afraid that you're not in control, basically. So anyway, that's what I'm looking for there. Again, jealousy among IPV users. So just that there's dependency issues often at play, as well as attachment issues. So dependency is another factor that is related to that. That's all I'm looking for there. Alrighty, Chapter 10, Violence Against Women Act. All I'm looking for there is that it needs to be expanded to cover more marginalized groups because of the wording in the act. It kind of does not include everyone. So that needs to be, because remember, we talked about how important definitions are and the language around them in order to be able to hold that up to law or have people use it as grounds for suing. Then there needs to be the kind of legal protection in it, like a specific language that's expanded to include all categories of women. All right, goals of intersectional research. Well, basically, they just want to make sure that those people that don't have power, that don't have a voice typically in the culture, are getting their voices heard. So typically when they're doing this research, they're trying to help, bring an understanding about groups of people that are typically marginalized and don't have their perspectives told. Okay, and then the dowry murders in India. Just this idea that there's an economic motive for a lot of this because, you get a new wife, you get a new dowry. In Nepal, just the idea that a lot of women are forced to, in more traditional areas, to both menstruate and often give birth within the cowshed, which causes all sorts of issues health-wise, and women often get harassed by men that kind of roam around and harass women that are in these cowsheds. So yeah. Okay, as far as acid throwing, it is often used because let's say that someone proposes to a woman and she says no, then he might be likely to throw acid in her face as a way to kind of say, you don't have the right to reject me. And it's a way that men feel that they can then gain power back if they feel that they lost power through the fact that, rejection doesn't feel good, right? Obviously. You ask someone out, you ask them to marry you, and they say no, that's like a gamble you knew you could take there, right? But typically, of course that's going to be upsetting. But in a more patriarchal society where there's more justification for these kind of behaviors, it becomes a way to mar the woman forever and ruin her ability to be kind of marriageable. Okay, and then the Taliban, basically, they have this, we talked about how in Afghanistan it was actually somewhat of an improvement over the laws previously, which is your wife, you're not allowed to rape your wife, right? But if your wife refuses to have sex with you, you are allowed to starve her. So that's considered an improvement over the kind of the marital rape that was previously kind of accepted as of a woman's role within marriage. Social ties of Latinum women, just this idea that it contributes to their victimization means that, for a lot of Latin women, because of some cultural norms that you are kind of absorbed into the family of your husband, in some areas, basically women are, they move away from their family and their friends and their networks, into their husbands, families, networks, and home. And as a result of that, they're more likely to be victimized, because if you're cut off from your support, from people that are looking out for you, then you're, a easier target to be controlled. All right, so there are some laws that basically help undocumented women that are facing abuse, meaning that, if they report the victimization that they're, experiencing to authorities, they are not going to be deported, but they are given kind of a temporary green card status that gives them an opportunity towards citizenship instead of towards being deported, simply because they are reporting that they're the victim of a crime. When it comes to police reporting in same-sex IPV, as far as like who is calling the police more, research and the book showed that lesbian women reported more same-sex IPV than did gay men. As far as lesbian female IPV, there's very little sympathy for the lesbian community as far as the issues of domestic violence. And as a result, a lot of women do not come forward and talk about their victimization because they don't want what happened to them to reflect upon the entire marginalized community. So that's a big problem. And often mental health professionals will blame victims themselves because they don't understand, or they have their own discriminatory or prejudicial logic. And really, it comes down to this idea of like, who do we consider worthy victims in society? We often don't consider the marginalized to be credible or worthy. So as a result, there's a lack of programs, there's not a lot of resources, and so a lot of women fall through the cracks. Okay, chapter 11. So social isolation, all I'm talking about there is that, often women that are battered are the most segregated or kept away or, excluded from their families, from social networks, from friends, from coworkers, right? Often a lot of these women aren't even allowed to work, or if they do, they're not really allowed to associate with their coworkers or any of those kind of situations because the abuser wants to have complete control over this person's life. So when it comes to empowerment strategies, they're basically opportunities for women to gain, power in their own lives and their own, strategies towards how they deal with the world and how they live their everyday life. And it gives them opportunities to take action to, promote a better way forward, a way to get past what they've faced and, try and help others not go down the same road that they did. So improving community services, basically the answer is right there. It's just this idea that we often look at professionals, or we look at, consultants, or all these kind of highbrow people that can talk to each other about what needs to be done. But oftentimes we don't ask battered women, what do you need, right? What services would you need the most, right? To let them lead and guide policy, because they've actually experienced it and they're actually going to know what, services are the most needed or what things could be the best resources. Okay, so as far as healthcare providers, just that it's important that healthcare providers know what to do when people report abuse or if they see any signs of abuse, because they are the most often, they are the first people that women disclose to, and it's the most likely source that a woman's going to disclose to. So it's important that they know how to refer and that they know how to report. As far as the need for training, just that there's still a lot of victim blaming going on, and so that means that oftentimes they're not referring people to services that need them, or even if they are, they're kind of alienating people that would be able to take part of these services and making them feel, bad, or often leading them down the path of not reporting. Okay, so characteristics of violent men, specifically, The answer is on page 548. I don't know. I feel like I make these so easy. I don't even know how to do the audio on these anymore. Anyway, the second most common treatment is cognitive behavioral therapy. Same thing. Problems of male socialization is linked to partner violence. Just again, that's obvious. That literally is that. This idea that the gender roles that we're taught, right? The concepts and constructs of masculinity, the fact that we live in a patriarchal society, right? Obviously, there's just this problem with the need to prove that you're a man that pushes a lot of this kind of violence and negative associations of dominance over women. Okay, chapter 12. So basically, just the idea that it's harder to realize that incidents of abuse are happening within elder populations than within children, which are both very hard to detect. And part of the reason is because sometimes elders may have misperceptions, or they obscure the truth because they blame themselves for what's happening, or they don't want to be seen as a victim. Alrighty, let's see. Some elders don't recognize their treatment as abuse. That's a big part of it. If they've come to normalize that kind of violence, the role of APS is basically to make sure that they investigate cases of elder abuse and, find out what's happening. Female elders endure more violent criminal victimization. So that's literally what that question's about. Again, I don't even know how to explain these. I'm just like, that's it. Which group of perpetrators commit the most victimization? That's all I'm really looking for there for this idea of perpetrators. So, it's often the adult children that are doing the most of this versus care workers or others, though those people also do these kind of things. Stress theory, just that oftentimes a lot of people are abused because, not because, but that the stress of dealing with people that are very hard to take care of because they're either, just in a lot of pain or just really difficult to be around. That's one explanation that stress theory uses to say that people that are more of a pain to deal with are going to be more likely to be abused. And then multidisciplinary community teams, just the effectiveness of combating elder abuse comes from these things like we talked about at UCI, where they have multidisciplinary community teams that come together and they have like a police officer and a social worker and all these different like facets, and they talk about their cases in a way where they can kind of overlap in a like beautiful Venn diagram of all the kind of specific services that they use or the perspectives that they have about those cases. All right, so how does military IPV differ from non-military IPV? Basically there, I want you to talk a little bit about PTSD, but not just to say, it's PTSD, but to explain that. Why would PTSD be that issue? And then what type of child abuse or spouse abuse do you think military researchers have the greatest opportunity to study and why? So that's really on you. You can pick one and then just give a brief, what it is, and then why you think that would be a good place for them to study. And then battered woman syndrome is not a legal defense for a murder charge. Do you think battered woman syndrome should be a defense in murder trials? Why or why not? So first, you're going to have to answer, do you think so? And then, and not just like, yes, or no, right? But like maybe a full sentence. How about that? And then, why or why not? Just, that's all you, right? I'm not going to be like, -5 points, I disagree, right? It's all about you arguing from your perspective of why you think or why you don't think that that's something that should happen. So hopefully this helps, and this is your last review. You're almost done. Final exam. Hope this helps.